there was a report put out, I believe it was in from a Russian news source, but it was about Alexander Nikishin, who was supposed to leave SKA and go to Carolina, and the thought was that Carolina was going to have him play in the playoffs. That was the thought, that when his contract being terminated or whatever with SKA was processed, that he was supposed to come over and play for Carolina, but he's not yet signed with Carolina, and so the agent spoke out. It's his Russian agent. Now, in fairness, probably important context to have here that I don't think everybody is aware of, and I'm not going to try to talk far too much on it because I don't have every version of this figured out exactly, right? Like the way that some of these players are dealt with and handled can vary, but there is what's the best way to put it? There are some players that come from the KHL that have representation from Russia that are different from the people who represent them in the U.S. So there are some players who have multiple agents, some on that side of the pond, some on this side of the pond. And it would appear that that is maybe the case here with Nikishin. And so we're going to pull this up really quick. So his agent explained what's been happening with the player and with Carolina. So the defenseman left SKA, came to North America, hasn't signed with Carolina, despite some kind of agreement being reached. So the interviewer asks, what reason is Carolina not signing a contract with him? And the agent says, because Carolina is one of the most difficult teams in terms of management. Everything is difficult with them. But we have very strong representatives overseas, the Quartex agency, who will resolve this issue in any case. Okay, so first of all, you have, I'm not sure, but this agent says good representatives overseas who are going to resolve it, but says Carolina is one of the most difficult teams in terms of management. Okay. Everything is difficult with them. Interesting, because we all remember what happened with Mikko Rantanen and the fact that they went and they traded Nikishin and they brought in Rantanen for a very short period of time because then they figured out he won't re-sign. And then they dealt him to Dallas. And they got like a good return in Stankoven and some more, but that was not a good look for that organization. And now you have an agent saying, oh yeah, Carolina's just hard to deal with. Okay, so the interviewer says, can't agree on some conditions? And the agent says, and again, this is obviously translated, so it's not perfect, but okay. I don't see anything difficult there, but Carolina is behaving incomprehensibly, and not only for us, but for scouts, representatives of other NHL clubs. Everyone is shocked and outraged. But as I was told, this is never surprising because Carolina always behaves like this and with everyone. At the moment, we cannot comment on the situation because the club's actions defy common sense. If this continues, Alexander will either go back to SKA or we will ask for a trade. So let's just take a second. Let's recap the last few months for Carolina because it ain't pretty. Carolina trades Nikishin. They bring in Rantanen from Colorado. Rantanen says, I'm not signing here. They have to trade Rantanen at the deadline to Dallas, get a decent return. I'd argue not the impact player that Rantanen is. So they look kind of stupid, but they are able to like sort of make things kind of okay. A little bit, but not great. They're able to kind of fix that situation, but not entirely. The way that the league looks at Carolina after that is totally different. I'm sure that the way that the Players Association looks at Carolina is probably not great after that debacle. Because again, even though you were able to go out and get Stankoven and get some other players, get some other assets, trading for a big name like Rantanen and then somehow not knowing he wasn't going to re-sign with you and then having to turn around and trade him before the deadline sets a weird kind of precedent. And now you have this player who negotiated, like, for however it happened, was let out of his contract by SKA in the KHL. He gets over here, presumably expects to play in the playoffs, and now he's not signed. And this Russian agent says, Carolina is one of the most difficult teams to deal with. They're behaving incomprehensibly. Everyone's shocked and outraged, but we were told not to be surprised because Carolina behaves like this with everyone, and that their actions defy common sense. And now you have this player that was believed to be somebody who could be of value to Carolina. You have this agent saying that if they don't get this shit figured out soon, he's either going to go back to Russia or ask for a trade. You want to talk about an absolute disaster? If you're Carolina, this is pretty damn close. This is bad, very bad for the Hurricanes. So good luck. Now, I'm not going to take the gratuitous shot that I could. I'm not going to take the gratuitous shot about this is what happens when you take a blogger and turn them into a front office executive. I'm not going to do that. There are people who are. And listen, this guy has found success. Tulski has found some success in this league. So he's not an idiot. But there are questions about whether or not like he has social emotional intelligence and like whether or not he understands how to deal with human beings and that like the game isn't a fucking spreadsheet, which in fairness, if you had read some of his stuff as a blogger, he very much looks at spreadsheets. He very much presumably looks at a lot of fucking spreadsheets and graphs and is very analytically based. But like at some point you have to look a human being in the eyes and try to find some kind of connection with them. And for better or worse, it sort of feels like he's not there. That this might not be his strong suit. And perhaps Carolina needs to find an assistant GM who can be the person to look across the table and kind of make a human connection. But it is a mess, an absolute mess in Carolina. People skills, they don't happen. It ain't happening there.